All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
Hi, Tricia. Thanks for being here.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
I am really looking forward to our discussion today, and I think this will be one of the most fascinating and unique episodes that we've done just because of the experience that you've led through the past 2 years, and I'm excited to explore that together a little bit. And to set the stage, before we get into Rocky Mountain Prep and the merger, which is going to be our topic for today, could you just share a little bit about your background prior to joining RMP?
Yeah, first of all, no pressure telling me this is going to be the most fascinating
that's right.
conversation. So Tricia Noyola, I am originally from the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. So it's pretty much the furthest south you can go in the United States. That's where I grew up. And before I came to Rocky Mountain Prep, I had actually worked at IDEA Public Schools for over a decade. I started at IDEA as a teacher, and then I did a bunch of different jobs at IDEA. I worked in human assets. I hired teachers. I coached them, hired and coached leaders, became a school leader myself. And by the time I left IDEA, I was executive director of IDEA Public Schools in Austin. And so I oversaw our expansion in Austin from 2 schools to 16 schools. It was a very exciting time, and I loved my time at IDEA. And, as I shared with you before, I learned everything I feel like I needed to learn about scaling excellence and ensuring excellence across the system from my time at IDEA.
Love it. Well, our last episode, we had a fellow IDEA alum in Vanessa Berry who talked about all the enrollment marketing tips and tricks that she learned at IDEA. And so I think it's fitting to have a fellow IDEA alum on today. So before we get into talking about the merger and its helpful background, just hearing about all the different roles that you held, on up to leading IDEA over the Austin region, can you take us back to really the underlying conditions for this merger? And for those that aren't familiar with the merger, maybe you could speak to just a little bit about Strive Prep and Rocky Mountain Prep, and how did you go from, I'm asking way too many questions in one, but how did you go from Austin, Texas to Colorado for this job?
Yeah, all good questions. So to be transparent, Denver was not on my short list. I don't ski. I really don't do anything outdoorsy. I don't brew my own beer. So this was not my ideal location initially. What really drew me to Denver was the role of CEO at Rocky Mountain Prep. And at the time, Rocky Mountain Prep was a network of 4 elementary schools, 3 in Denver and 1 in Aurora. And the reason why I just fell in love with Rocky Mountain Prep is it was a system of schools founded on 2 pillars, both rigor and love. And it was the first system that I really saw that was putting equal weight and effort and attention into both, making sure that there was rigorous academics, kids were being successful across the board, but also they were creating loving and supportive environments. And so I took the plunge and came to Denver. I knew just about as much about Denver as you get from like a Google search. I just showed up with my husband and my 4 kids and my 5 animals, and we just made our home here. And it was incredibly thrilling and invigorating to step into a CEO role because I loved my time at IDEA. And fundamentally, my role was about replicating a pre-existing model, right? And there was a lot of things, I didn't necessarily determine in my role as an executive director. And so it was very exciting to switch hats and go more to the design thinking end, and also getting to make a lot of the business and budgetary decisions, of which, I made my fair share at IDEA, but not nearly to the scale that I made as a CEO here. And once I came here in 2021, I became buddies with Chris Gibbons, who at the time was the CEO of Strive Prep. And he was the founder of Strive Prep. And over the course of the friendship we developed and the conversations that we had, I knew that he was looking to what was going to come next for him, and specifically what was going to come next for Strive. And, being born and bred in the school of Tom Torkelson and Joanne Gama, I was just looking around and I saw, well, most Strive schools are located really close to our schools. And in some cases, we even shared a building, or we were 2 blocks away from each other. So in that sense, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me why these 2 systems were operating separately when fundamentally we seem to be serving the same communities, the same kids and families. And both organizations had strengths, but also had challenges. And so it didn't make a ton of sense to me that if, Strive was looking forward what was going to be coming next, and I, as a leader, had already ran a fairly large system, I was like, well, have you thought of this? This is literally as much thought as I put into it. Exactly what I just told you. Like, well, Chris, have you thought of that? He was like, no. And, the fine line between hubris and genius is, I think all leaders toe it. And I was probably more on hubris at that moment, but I was like, I think I could do that. I have a lot of experience with middle and high school, and I do understand what it is to run a large system at scale. And so that's how that idea came to be. We were eating some Mexican food. It was very informal. It was not.
This wasn't like the 2 boards met in like a parking lot. This was you and Chris over tacos.
We went for tacos.
Wow.
Yes, that's how that's how most things in my life happen. But and Chris was my colleague. He was my buddy, so I felt comfortable just talking to him. Now, eventually, the boards did get involved and get way more official. But I would say the initial agreement, and he would say the same thing, was between him and I.
So once that conversation has started, once the tacos have been eaten, and the idea has been thrown out there, I imagine if you're both kind of like, that's an interesting idea, maybe we should explore that a little bit. I would think that, you start to jump into evaluating the viability of bringing these 2 organizations together. What were some of the key factors that you all started to think about to say, hey, maybe this isn't just an interesting idea. Maybe this is something we should really do. You alluded to, there was kind of like academic and grade level complements between elementary and then middle and high. But then you also alluded to both organizations having some challenges. Maybe talk us through some of the factors that you felt like weighed into the viability of this merger.
Yeah, so I would say there are 2 big factors I know are certainly at play here in Colorado, and I would imagine are definitely in play in other states. The first one was declining enrollment in Denver. Again, you see this all over the country. Denver is no exception. And in fact, it has happened at a very accelerated pace here in Denver, particularly in the communities where Strive had some of the most presence, where, our families that we were serving moving out of communities en masse. And so you have a much smaller forgive the business term, but like you have a much smaller market. So you have to get a much bigger market share, not just to be able to survive, but to thrive. And so I was watching, particularly Strive schools had declined significantly enrollment over the past 3 to 4 years. And this was a huge challenge too that Chris and I talked very openly about. So that was one. And so again, I'm not an MBA, but I do know math. And so I know that if there's less kids and potentially we have increased competition, but we're not confident that the product we're putting out is consistently high quality, that can set any business, and a school is no exception, on just sort of a doom spiral. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I would say that some of our middle and high schools were in that doom spiral. And so what a really savvy CEO should do is evaluate these opportunities very carefully and, make very strategic decisions. But you told me I could tell you the truth, so I'm going to do that.
Please.
I had in my mind we were going to do this regardless because I thought it was the right thing to do. And at various points in this process, different groups of people got very irritated with me for this because there were, I would say, more reasons not to do it than to do it. But what was my North Star was, at the end of the day, I felt like this was the right thing to do by kids and families in both systems, and that it would set us up to be an enduring institution. Because I did not see, given the way, the winds of change were moving, I did not see the world in which we could all survive and thrive. So did we go through due diligence? Yes. Did we go through a process, where we looked at all the financials? We did an organizational health analysis. We worked with experts. And I can tell you at various iterations are like, are you guys sure you want to do this? And to Chris's credit and to mine, we continue to say, yes, we think this is going to be the right move. And it's going to be really, really hard. So I don't think, at least I didn't have some sort of pie in the sky notion that this wouldn't be the most challenging thing, at least I had ever done.
So there was a combination of, there were academic reasons, there were business reasons, and then, as you alluded to, there was really this long-term vision for a stable, thriving organization, community of schools, kind of the 1 + 1 = 3 opportunity. I want to unpack some of because you mentioned there's always a much longer list of reasons not to do something. I think this is so true. It's very easy to always point out all the reasons not to do something. As you all got into the experts come in, the financial people with their calculators come in, everyone has different opinions, I would imagine, on the two boards. What were some of the things that emerged as potential reasons this could not work, and then potential reasons that it could work? Maybe just name for us a few on both sides of the equation, anti-merger, pro-merger. What were some of the things that emerged as the real due diligence got underway?
Yeah, great question. And this is a fun exercise for me to go back in time. So on the no, there were many cons. I'll just pick a few. One was that, fundamentally the financial model, to put it bluntly, the math didn't math. They were running at significant deficits, and the organization was running at a significant deficit. Strive was. And, the only thing that had sort of staved that off for a while was ESSER funds. And so once that came in, it immediately stabilized the network, right? But as you are likely seeing too across the country, that was not going to be a long-term plan. So when we actually, got under the hood and looked at, okay, outside of ESSER funding, outside of sort of these Hail Mary sources, what would this actually look like? And I'll be honest with you, Daniel, it was scary. Again, not an MBA, but I feel like I've learned a lot. And what I was looking at, I was like, I know that's not going to work. And so I have to do my job on all sides of this. And I have to present to our board, RMP, and our stakeholders, yeah, you're right. This is not good. In terms of human capital and rich history and a lot of things, Strive brought a ton to the table. I want to be clear. And for the people who are just doing the dollars and cents and the napkin calculations, This makes no sense. So I'd say that was number one. Number two was, in any business, you look for a trend line. You look for signs of life, right? So even if, one department is trending down, but you've got a product that's on its way up, then you can say, okay, great. We have something that lets us know there's something in this business that is trending up. And when I tell you, we could not find anything that was trending up, from enrollment, staff retention, average daily attendance, like all in schools, the baseline.
Right. The top line.
Yes.
Yeah. These are the things we're looking at.
It was all trending down. Right. And so again, I have to go and be really honest and say, and all these other things we would typically look at and say, is this a good fit? Well, none of it looks like a good fit. And then I think the third real blow, and I can still remember the day when our consultants presented the organizational diagnostic of both organizations. And they literally used the phrase, we have not seen two organizations with more radically different views on adult behavior, on student achievement. They give you this fun little, I don't know if you've been through a merger process, but they gave you green light, yellow light, red light, right? It was all red. It wasn't just like, well, we're somewhat apart. No, people in both organizations have wildly divergent views of what, to me, these very essential things mean in our business, right? These very essential practices, what they actually mean. So truthfully, I had no great pros. Pro was, there's kids in these schools. They need and deserve, my personal belief, have a God-given right to a great education. And some of them are getting it and some of them really aren't. And there were so many, and still are, incredible, exceptional human beings in both organizations, but particularly on the Strive side. And when I got deeper and deeper into the culture and spent more time and saw the ways in which, not maliciously, but the organization was wasting money, the ways in which I saw we just have inefficiencies, I was like, oh, this is solvable. In my view, it was solvable.
Yeah.
Now, the adult culture, I was like, well, I don't know. These other things, though, I did see a clear through line to where we could get to a better spot.
Okay. So you go through that whole process. There's lots of red lights. However, progress happens. You move forward with the merger. Take us into, I'll call it year zero of bringing these two organizations together. You alluded to like one of the big things being just fundamentally different identities, if you will, between the two organizations, and that being something the consultants really called out.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you start as a leader? Because obviously you have all this experience scaling and leading through growth, but almost no one is super prepared to lead a merger unless you're, I don't know, Disney's CEO or something.
Which he's had a really hard time too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. And so where do you even begin, I guess, is the question, because you've got the business problems, you've got the people problems, you've got the kind of like, do we have enough students problem? What was the starting place in year zero?
Yeah. So the good news is that I cut my chops as a turnaround principal. So that's how I learned how to lead a school. And so that has sort of informed every other thing I've ever done. And I tried to extrapolate the lessons I learned from that to apply to this context. And so fundamentally, first, we had to define what we are calling success in this new organization, because that was one of the biggest areas of divergence. Everyone thought we existed for a different purpose. And so first, it was just really defining we exist to ensure that we are going to democratize college access for children and families that have been historically marginalized. And so what that means is fundamentally, we believe that we as the adults have to hold ourselves accountable to adult learning. We have to hold ourselves accountable to outcomes, which means we have to track and measure them, which means we have to set stakes in the ground around firm, numerical targets around where we need to be. And whenever I describe this to someone, they're like, well, duh. I'm like, yeah, no, it does sound duh. And fundamentally in education, I personally don't understand it. In many ways, I think we often just like ignore or abandon what is good management. Why we do that, I don't know. But again, I didn't study business, but because of my background at IDEA and because of all the things that I'd done, I did understand fundamentally we had to do that first. And so it really was about getting everyone behind this very basic rallying cry of, we have these big 5 measurable goals. We're going to hold everyone in the system accountable to them. And this is going to serve like as our network report card to let us know of our health. And, folks that were coming from the RMP side, that's the first thing I had done at RMP. So they're like, yeah, okay. Like that was not revolutionary.
They were used to that framework, right?
But for our, particular middle and high schools, this was dramatically different from the way that they had been operating. So I'd say that was one. And what I'd love to tell you is that I did a wonderful job in change management and everyone just like really coalesced behind this and I did phenomenal. That did not happen. You can do a quick Google search and figure that out. And so, yeah, it was rough. I am a mom of 4, but I'm an adoptive mom. I have never actually given birth, but the best analogy I can use is it was like a very long labor process. It was very, very painful. And at many points in the big, messy middle, I was like, I don't know how this is all going to shake out. Did we make a mistake? Was this maybe too much, right? And I think the advice I would offer anybody, I read Bob Iger's books. I've read from all the great leaders, like they all felt that way.
Yeah.
They never in the middle of it were like, this is it. And so I think oftentimes, at least in education and in this charter space, we've lost sometimes this ability to really tolerate the messy middle and to understand like, no, of course it doesn't look pretty while we're doing it right. But what is your risk tolerance? Can you tolerate the backlash? Can you tolerate people's hurt feelings? Can you tolerate the pressure? Obviously, I'm sitting here today, so my answer
You're still standing. Yeah.
Yeah, my answer is yes, but every leader is different. So I would not recommend this to everybody. If I did not have the North Star of the kids in our schools, if I wasn't completely clear on the reason I'm doing this is not because I'm going to get accolades, because I haven't gotten any. The reason I'm doing this is not because someone's going to write this great story about me, because that didn't happen. The reason I wanted to do this is because I thought it was the right thing to do. And if you are going forward with that, then you just got to accept what comes. Now, you're not going to like it, but you do accept it. But no, at no point in the middle of this did I have lots of indications this was going great.
Significantly harder than you thought it was going to be, or about what you expected?
So the operational and business challenges and academic challenges were actually not harder than I thought they were going to be. In some cases, they were actually way more manageable once we started getting the winds at our sail. What was much harder was the psychological and emotional impact on me. That I was completely unprepared for. I did not, again, hubris, right? I didn't stop to think about, wow, what's it going to feel like when I've been, screamed at for the 65th time? I didn't think through that. And so that was a lot harder. So if I could go back, again, I'd still do it, but I would think about that a lot more and put a lot more supports for myself in place before I started.
Well, I appreciate the transparency, and certainly your own self-reflection, I think, offers a lot of insight for others. I want to ask 2 more questions about this year 0, and then I want to continue on this thread of maybe some other recommendations for leaders who potentially are considering something similar. So going back to just the challenge of integrating the organizations, 2 questions. Is there anything that we'll start on the positive side, that you're super grateful you took the time to do or invest in? And I'm going to ask you the opposite next. So we'll start with the things you're really grateful that you took the time, or the team took the time to invest in year 0, that you feel like has paid dividends.
Yeah, so much. I would say the investment that we have made in fixing, improving, and upgrading many of our financial and business practices. Again, it's not the sexiest and most exciting topic, but
you're talking to someone who works for a procurement organization. Come on, Tricia.
Well, there you go.
This is,
I know my audience.
That's right. Yes. Thank you. The business financials.
But that is my legitimate answer, because, when you go through something like this, everyone has 8,000 opinions of what has to happen right now, especially when you are a leader who hasn't done this before. And I also believe that, you're a woman and you're a woman of color. Everyone wants to swoop in and tell you, well, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this, and this. So you have to get really good at listening and then turning and going back and saying, okay, but I had this idea in the first place, and I have a sense of what needs to happen. And so there's a lot, you just got to go with your gut. And so one of the first things we did is, started going through and right sizing our model, actually looking at, okay, number of students, number of sections, number of staff, what does it cost to run this building? What are the investments we need to make in terms of curriculum, computers, tools, just basic infrastructure that some of our schools were lacking, and do that first. And the reason why is because, one, I know, again, from my experience, financial model determines everything. So I can't do anything else. And two, those gave us some really early wins with kids and families and staff, because all of a sudden, when you're taking out a textbook that's 20 years old and you're giving a kid something that is different and new, just the psychological impact of that is huge. And it allowed me too to be able to go in and say, hey, funder, hey, community member, hey, person, look what's happening. It's been a couple of months and we're doing exactly what I told you we were going to do. And again, I had no sense of whether there was more money going to be coming in. I didn't know, but I knew we had to do that, right? And so I don't regret doing that at all. And in fact, really hats off to the organization, to the team, for being willing to go out on a limb on a lot of things first, and not necessarily knowing how that was going to shake out. And I think investing the time, the money, and the buy-in in that was huge. What I didn't do enough time in, conversely, as an organization, we didn't do enough time in, is really figuring out how to bring people through the adaptive changes. And what I mean by that is everyone fixates on, like, the name is different, the colors are different, I have a new this. But it wasn't until we got further into the year that the real friction started to develop around, okay, but wait a second, I didn't have to do this before. Why are you asking me to do this now? Or we used to let students do this, and now you're saying we're not. And for better or for worse, my number one strength on Strengths Finder is self-assurance, 2 is command. So I don't have a problem going in and making a decision, telling people this is a decision. I did not do enough soft work, hard work, whatever you want to call it, really sitting with people and saying, first, let's turn down the temperature and let's pull back the curtain. And let's talk about why this is happening and why this thing that I know matters to you a lot, why we can't do that anymore, because it's ultimately not going to serve us in the long term. And because we didn't do enough of that, or I want to be clear, because I didn't do enough of that, I do believe it created additional challenges, and maybe we still would have had them. I don't know,
Sure.
But they could have gone a lot better.
Really good advice. So as you're entering a new year, we're recording this on August the 1st. Give us just a little insight into, are you still focused on the same 5 big rocks, so to speak, that, metrics of success? Or do you feel like this is now a new year to move into a second phase of bringing these organizations together? Maybe just give us a little color on that.
Well, we'll always have the big 5. It's part of our DNA at Rocky Mountain Prep. But what we have rolled out this year is 2 things, again, that I stole from the for-profit world. I was obsessed with Ron Shaik, the CEO of Panera. Read his book like 6 times, watched all his interviews, made notes. I'm very nerdy in my private life. And he talked through this process of Every great business needs a concept essence. It is the emotional blueprint of the business. It doesn't just spell out like Panera's case, we make sandwiches, but who are you? Why do you do that? And how does that inform the choices you make or don't make? So now at RMP, we have a concept essence. It is our emotional blueprint. And we're very clear now. And having just come off of staff induction, we say we're not a school system, that we're a movement. And being a movement is very different than just running 12 great schools. And so solidifying what is our emotional blueprint as an organization, and then how does that inform the choices we make, but also the choices we don't make. Clearly defining, we go in this direction because this is who we are. It's not what we do. It's who we are. And this is who we're going to be. And then from that concept essence came our academic vision, where we really spelled out, here's the 3 pillars we're most obsessed with right now. The pillar we're most obsessed with is literacy. So we say literacy equals justice. There is a reading crisis across this country. And I know this isn't that type of podcast, so I'm not going to get on that soapbox. But Google it, everybody. This is a huge problem. And, mark my words, as a country, if we do not solve this problem, my children are on track. Their generation is doing much worse educationally than mine did. We're not just not closing the opportunity gap, we are actually accelerating it. And so the way that has played out for us at Rocky Mountain Prep is the vast majority of our middle and high schoolers are coming to us right now reading 3rd grade level or below. We've had a ton of successes as an organization. And I want to be clear, our teachers at RMP are magicians. We run incredible schools. I have the best job in the world. Take that, Disney. I do believe that. And, what keeps me up at night is fundamentally justice delayed is justice denied. And our kids have been denied. And so we are obsessed with right now, not just making sure college preparatory curriculum and practices are in front of every single child, but that we are investing a huge amount of resources in making sure that every single kid and family has the tools they need, because reading for us, this is our civil rights issue. We're living on it. We're not going to die, but this is what we're doing. What I can tell you, Daniel, what makes this system that I lead very different from any system I've been a part of is if you talk to a senior high school teacher, they are just as enthused and invested as the kindergarten teacher. We all understand what we're doing here and why. That goes back to having a very clear concept essence and emotional blueprint, very clear vision of what we're doing, and everyone is mobilizing behind that. So it is a different network than it was 2 years ago on every side. And who we are today, I couldn't be more proud of. It's better than anything I had ever envisioned when I started this.
That's amazing. All right. Well, let's come to a close here. And I want to ask for just a few final recommendations for others who might be considering this. I think the hard reality that the broader charter school community is finding themselves in, particularly in states that have experienced essentially what you described in Denver, where there's been really just a change in the demographics, and now there's enrollment issues and the budgets are getting squeezed. And all of a sudden, the idea of a merger, to use the private sector term, M&A is all of a sudden on the table as a means to growth, as a means to survival, as a means to better serving students. Why take 2 schools that are under enrolled? Let's create one great school.
Right.
I know I've had that conversation more frequently in recent times. And so what would you say to the Tricias and Chris's who might be having tacos right now and are having a similar conversation? What would your advice to them be? And you could speak to, like, if you're going to consider this, think about this in due diligence, or really consider the identities of your 2 organizations. Like, as you reflect back on it, what are some of the things? And you've given a bunch throughout the conversation, but maybe going back to, like, now that you know everything pre-merger, what are some of the things that you wish you had maybe talked about or explored a little bit further or considered as part of the evaluation as to the viability of bringing 2 organizations together?
Yeah. This again is going to be in Tricia fashion. Okay. So not everyone's going to like this advice.
Okay.
I would tell people you need to do it. So I think, I call it, and Chris and James know this because I have laughed with them about it, but I call this founder syndrome, where, I have founded a family and a marriage, but like I have never, started a business. I've not done that. So I think a huge benefit I've always had is I approached these situations, this situation in particular, to me, it was a business decision. And that didn't mean that there weren't going to be a whole host of other considerations. But at the end of the day, I take the responsibility that we have to kids and families and to our community, because these dollars are theirs. They're not mine. They're not Chris's. They're not James's. They're not yours. They belong to children. And so as the adults in the system, it behooves us, and we actually have to really take ego out of the equation. And the charter sector is not immune to ego. I think we both know that. And to Chris's credit, it requires a huge amount of being willing to, step aside from your ego and your legacy to think about, okay, but right now, what is the next best thing I can do? What is the next right decision that we can make? And, I can tell you in our conversations, Chris and I always talked about that. So for anyone out there who's having that conversation, I need you to think about like, what is the most right thing I can do right now, not what feels the best or what might put me in a light. Like I can tell you, like Chris, that was not his concern at all. And in that way, I feel very blessed that he was my partner in this, because he cared about the same stuff that I did. So one, I would have to say, everybody's got to take their ego down about 10,000 notches, right? Because we have to have a conversation about children. Two, I would really encourage folks to think about, what is your market going to look like in 5 years? Not today, not right now, not 4 months from now, or this really cool thing you've got planned, but like, let's be real. What is this going to look like 5 years from now? And that's not an opinion. You can actually work with demographers. You can work with folks who do this for a living, which we did. So we had a very clear picture of, this is where this is going. We're not going to stop it. I don't know how to stop income inequality and gentrification. So again, what's the next right thing you can do? And the other thing I would tell people, and I always do, I tell them, email me, call me, because I had zero expertise on this at all. I didn't even have knowledge of it at all. And it's funny, while we were going through this, all I heard about is, what a weird idea this was, what a bad idea,
Right. Are you crazy? Why are you doing this? Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Which my answer is yes, of course. I like, if you know me, yeah, I am. But now it's like, oh, well, that was really great. And, I'll take it. Like, you get more friends when you're successful, and I'm not stupid. I do understand that. But I want people to know that if you are driven by the right things, if you are driven by every kid deserves the best, and like I am willing to put aside at times my own comfort, my own ego, sometimes my sanity, to be able to do that, kids are going to win. You're going to be successful. But if you're looking for some like fail-safe method to win an award and preserve your legacy, and like, okay, well then don't do this. This is a terrible idea. But if you are, I got into the charter world because I got tired of working in a system that prioritized the ego and comfort of grownups over what children deserve. So if you're here with me to do that, then you need to do that. And you need to call or email me, or call or email the other leaders who have done this. And, my other encouragement too is, if you're in a state like Colorado, where per pupil revenue is very poor, the math does not math here. You are better served by making this move preemptively. Because what's going to happen is we as a charter sector are going to lose market share of seats. So we also have to ask ourselves, is this a seat we want disappearing, Or would we prefer that our families continue to retain an option, that they have something other than what they're being offered? But again, those conversations take a level of divorcing from ego and a lot of real talk. And again, I know I'm very privileged because I'm not a founder, so my feelings aren't wrapped up.
Right. It's not your baby.
It's really not.
It is, but it isn't.
No, I always joke with people when, we were having the debate over what are we going to call this? I'm like, you guys, I didn't start either one of these systems. I really don't care what we call it. That's not what I'm doing here. I don't really care.
Yeah.
But you likely need a leader like that who's going to do that, because it gets too hard and emotions get too high. So you need someone in there who's like, okay, pause. What were we trying to do here? But I don't think that's a superhuman thing. I think in the charter world, that is part of what we did really well, which is make those decisions that were driven by children. And I think we can do it again. And I think this is a prime moment to do it.
What a great place to bring the conversation to an end. So, Tricia, you said, call me, email me. I will not ask you for your email and phone number live on this podcast, but where should people go if they want to learn more about Rocky Mountain Prep, if they want to connect with you? Where should we send them? Is it LinkedIn? Is it the Rocky Mountain Prep website? Where should they go?
I appreciate that, because I would be wild enough to give out my phone number on a podcast. My husband wouldn't like that, though. So the best place actually is to go on LinkedIn, because I also share a lot of things on LinkedIn, our learnings through this process. And I do talk, more broadly about coaching, mergers, acquisitions, and other stuff. So I would actually encourage you to start there first. Of course, you can go to rockymountainprep.org to learn about our organization. But if you want to, connect with Tricia the human, I would suggest you go to LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to help anybody answer any questions. And I promise you, whoever's listening out there, whatever challenge you're facing or considering, I promise I could probably reveal 9 things that we went through that were absolutely terrible. So there's no, I don't have pride of ownership. There's no shame. Let's just solve this. Let's figure it out. So happy to connect with anybody.
Awesome. Well, my last question for you, since you called yourself a nerd, I have to ask, what are any books, resources, things that you have found particularly helpful on this last couple years journey that we can link in the show notes, maybe for other CEOs who are like, I just need some inspiration or I need some new ideas? Anything that you've found? You mentioned the Panera book. Any others that come to mind?
I would highly recommend Ron Shaikh's book. The title escapes me, but that was...
We'll look it up. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that was a super inspirational and informative. And then Hubert Jolly, who was the former CEO of Best Buy, who essentially led their transformation from, they were a failing company and about to go under. And he didn't just revitalize them, but transform that. That informed a lot of my thinking around prioritization in this merger, and also helped to build my confidence around, listen, if an electronics store can do this, surely we could do some things too. So I highly, highly, highly recommend his book. I believe it's called The Heart of Business. And then, I am a big coaching person. So I'm a certified executive coach, and a lot of the reading and the work I do outside of my day job has to do with coaching and working with leaders. And so I really love Radical Candor. I really love Radical Respect, Kim's follow-up book, and just anything as it relates to human development, because I've learned through this merger, it is, it's probably about 35% business strategy, and the other 65%, it's human development and human work.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on, Tricia. I really appreciate it. And this has been great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.